In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a slow pace. The streets were lined with old brick buildings, their walls covered in ivy, and the air carried the faint scent of pine trees. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where kids played freely in the parks and where crime seemed like something that only happened in big cities far away. But beneath this peaceful surface lay secrets darker than anyone could have imagined. Among the residents was a young boy named Marcus Reed, whose life would soon become intertwined with the ugliness hidden behind closed doors. Marcus lived with his father, James Reed, who was one of the most respected figures in town. James wasn't just any man. He was a police officer, a good one. Unlike many of his colleagues, James refused to turn a blind eye to wrongdoing. He believed in serving justice, even if it meant going against those in power. His dedication earned him admiration from some, but also made him enemies among those who thrived on corruption. Despite the risks, James never wavered in his commitment to doing what was right. To Marcus, his father was a hero, someone he looked up to more than anyone else in the world. Every evening after finishing his shift, James would walk home with Marcus by his side. These walks were special moments for both of them. They talked about school, sports, and sometimes even serious topics like fairness and honesty. James often told Marcus stories about how important it was to stand up for what is right, no matter how hard things got. "The world needs people willing to fight for truth," James would say, his voice firm yet gentle. Little did Marcus know how much those words would shape his future. But not everyone appreciated James's efforts. Within the police department, there existed a group of officers known as the Syndicate. These men didn't care about protecting the innocent or enforcing the law. They cared about money and control. They ran illegal operations, accepted bribes, and silenced anyone who dared to oppose them. For years, they had operated without interference, growing bolder and more ruthless with time. When James began investigating their activities, they saw him as a threat that needed to be eliminated. One chilly autumn night, as James and Marcus strolled home along the dimly lit streets, everything changed forever. The sky was overcast, and the wind carried a biting chill. As they approached a narrow alley near their house, two masked figures emerged from the shadows. Before either James or Marcus could react, one of the men pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at James. Panic surged through Marcus's body as he clung tightly to his father's hand. "Please, don't hurt my dad," he cried, tears streaming down his face. James shielded Marcus with his body, his eyes locked onto the assailants. "You won't get away with this," he said, his voice steady despite the fear evident in his expression, but his words fell on deaf ears. Without hesitation, the gunman fired 3 shots. The sound echoed through the deserted street, shattering the silence. James collapsed to the ground, blood pooling around him as Marcus screamed in horror. The attackers didn't stick around to see what happened next. They vanished into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. Neighbors rushed out upon hearing the commotion, but it was too late. James lay motionless, his life slipping away before their eyes. Paramedics arrived shortly afterward, but nothing could be done to save him. Marcus sat beside his father's body, clutching his hand tightly, refusing to let go. His cries pierced the night, drawing sorrowful gazes from everyone present. In that moment, the innocence of childhood was stripped away from him, replaced by a searing pain that would haunt him for the rest of his life. News of James's murder spread rapidly throughout the town, sending shockwaves through the community. People whispered about who might be responsible, though few dared to speak openly. The official investigation led nowhere. Evidence mysteriously disappeared, witnesses recanted their statements, and the case was eventually closed due to lack of leads. Everyone knew the truth. The syndicate had struck again, and no one was brave enough to challenge them. For Marcus, the loss of his father left an unfillable void. He moved in with his grandmother, a kind-hearted woman who tried her best to provide comfort and stability, yet she couldn't shield him from the anger and grief consuming him. Every night, Marcus replayed the scene in his mind. The cold steel of the gun, the deafening sound of the shots, and the sight of his father falling to the ground. He swore to himself that someday, somehow, he would find the men responsible and make them pay for what they had done. As the years passed, Marcus grew older, but the memory of that fateful night remained fresh in his mind. School became a distraction rather than a priority, and friendships faded as he withdrew into himself. His grandmother noticed the change in him but didn't push too hard, knowing that some wounds take longer to heal than others. Still, she encouraged him to focus on building a better future, hoping that time would soften the edges of his pain. On his 18th birthday, Marcus made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He packed a small bag, kissed his grandmother goodbye, and left town without looking back. He didn't tell anyone where he was going or what he planned to do. All he knew was that staying in that town, surrounded by reminders of his father's death and the injustice that followed, was suffocating. He needed to leave, to find strength, knowledge, and purpose outside the confines of the place that had failed him. What Marcus didn't realize at the time was that his journey would lead him down a path filled with challenges, sacrifices, and revelations. Over the next 2 decades, he transformed into someone entirely different from the frightened boy who once huddled beside his dying father. He joined the military, learning discipline, resilience, and the art of survival. Later, he trained as a private investigator, mastering techniques to uncover hidden truths and gather evidence. Along the way, he encountered others who shared his disdain for corruption and joined forces with them, forming a network of individuals committed to fighting for justice. Through it all, Marcus kept his promise alive in his heart. He studied the workings of corrupt systems, understanding how they thrived and how they could be dismantled. He learned patience, knowing that revenge wasn't something to rush into blindly. Instead, he focused on becoming stronger, smarter, and more resourceful. Each step forward brought him closer to the day when he would return to his hometown, not as the broken child who left, but as a man prepared to face the monsters who destroyed his family. Back in the town he once called home, life continued. As usual, the syndicate still ruled with impunity, their influence stretching into every corner of society. Detective Harris and Lieutenant Grayson, the 2 men responsible for James's murder, rose through the ranks, their reputations untarnished by the truth. They laughed off rumors of their involvement, confident that no one would dare to challenge them. Meanwhile, Marcus's name faded from public memory, reduced to a footnote in the annals of local history. Unbeknownst to them, however, Marcus was watching. From afar, he monitored their movements, studied their habits, and pieced together the puzzle of their empire. He knew that taking them down wouldn't be easy. It required precision, strategy, and unwavering determination. And so, he waited, biding his time until the moment was right. Deep inside, he felt the weight of his mission pressing down on him, driving him forward with every passing day. The son of James Reed was coming back, and when he did, the town would never be the same again. The years following James Reed's murder were marked by a deep and suffocating silence in the small town. Life went on for most people, but for Marcus, every day was a battle against grief and rage. His grandmother did her best to provide stability, cooking warm meals, tucking him into bed at night, and reminding him that he still had love in his life. But no amount of kindness could erase the image of his father lying motionless on the cold pavement or the deafening sound of gunshots that haunted his dreams. Marcus often sat alone in his room, staring at an old photograph of his father in uniform. He clung to those memories like lifelines, determined not to let the world forget who James Reed was, or what had been taken from him. School became a blur for Marcus. Once a bright student with a curious mind, he now struggled to focus on lessons. Teachers noticed the change but assumed it was just the natural response of a boy who had lost his father so tragically. They encouraged him to talk about his feelings, but Marcus kept his emotions locked away, afraid that opening up would make the pain unbearable. Instead, he channeled his energy into studying maps, learning about geography, and reading books about history and justice systems. These topics fascinated him because they felt practical, tools he might one day use to dismantle the corrupt forces that had destroyed his family. Though he didn't fully understand it then, Marcus was already preparing himself for the long road ahead. As Marcus grew older, the anger inside him began to take shape. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a burning desire for revenge. He couldn't shake the feeling that the men who killed his father were still out there, living their lives as if nothing had happened. Every time he saw Detective Harris or Lieutenant Grayson walking down the street, their badges gleaming under the sun, bile rose in his throat. How could they smile and laugh when they had robbed him of his father? The injustice gnawed at him, eating away at his soul until it consumed nearly every thought. At night, he lay awake imagining different ways to confront them, to force them to admit what they had done. But even in his wildest fantasies, he knew he wasn't ready. Not yet. When Marcus turned 16, he started working odd jobs around town to save money. He mowed lawns, delivered newspapers, and helped neighbors fix things around their houses. Some people pitied him and gave him extra cash, while others simply appreciated his hard work. Whatever the reason, Marcus accepted the money without complaint, knowing exactly what he planned to do with it. By the time he graduated high school, he had saved enough to leave town and start a new life elsewhere. His grandmother begged him to stay, tears streaming down her face, but Marcus remained resolute. "I have to go," he told her gently. "If I stay here, I'll lose myself." On the morning of his departure, Marcus packed a small duffel bag with clothes, a few personal belongings, and the photograph of his father. He hugged his grandmother tightly, promising to write to her whenever he could. Then, without looking back, he boarded a bus headed for the nearest city. As the bus pulled away, Marcus stared out the window, watching the familiar streets fade into the distance. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Not because the pain was gone, but because he finally had a plan. He didn't know where this journey would lead him, but he was certain of one thing: he would never stop fighting for justice. The city was overwhelming at first. Towering buildings loomed over narrow streets, bustling with people rushing to and fro. The cars honked incessantly, and the air carried the mingling scents of food carts, exhaust fumes, and rain-soaked asphalt. Marcus quickly realized that survival here required resilience and adaptability, qualities he hadn't needed in his sleepy hometown. He rented a tiny apartment in a rough part of town, scraping together rent by taking on whatever work he could find. During the day, he worked as a janitor in an office building, cleaning floors and emptying trash bins. At night, he studied books borrowed from the local library, teaching himself everything he could about criminal psychology, investigative techniques, and self-defense. It wasn't long before Marcus discovered the military recruitment center downtown. Drawn by the promise of discipline and purpose, he decided to enlist. Joining the military was more than just a job for Marcus. It was a way to transform himself physically and mentally. Basic training pushed him to his limits, testing his endurance and resolve. There were days when he wanted to quit, when the drills seemed impossible, and the instructors' voices echoed harshly in his ears. But each time he thought about giving up, he remembered his father's voice saying, "The world needs people willing to fight for truth." Those words fueled him, driving him to push through the pain and exhaustion. Over the next several years, Marcus served honorably, earning respect from his fellow soldiers and superiors alike. He excelled in combat training, mastering skills in marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and tactical planning. Beyond physical prowess, he developed critical thinking abilities, learning how to analyze situations and anticipate outcomes. Most importantly, he learned the value of teamwork and trust, lessons that would prove invaluable later in his quest for justice. Despite the camaraderie he found among his comrades, however, Marcus always kept a part of himself guarded. He rarely spoke about his past, preferring to keep his reasons for joining private. To everyone else, he was just another soldier doing his duty. But inside, he carried the weight of his mission, knowing that his true battle awaited him after his service ended. After completing his military contract, Marcus transitioned into civilian life once again. This time, though, he returned with a newfound sense of purpose and confidence. He enrolled in a private investigator course, eager to learn the intricacies of gathering evidence, conducting surveillance, and navigating legal systems. The classroom, Setting reminded him of school, except now he paid attention with laser-like focus. He absorbed every detail, asking questions and practicing techniques until he became proficient. Outside of class, he networked with other investigators, building relationships that would serve him well in the future. Slowly but surely, Marcus transformed himself into someone capable of taking on even the most powerful adversaries. During this period, Marcus also began researching corruption networks, studying how they operated and maintained control. He read case studies of whistleblowers who had exposed scandals and analyzed why some succeeded while others failed. One thing became clear to him. Dismantling such organizations required more than brute force. It demanded strategy, patience, and allies. Marcus understood that going after Harris and Grayson directly would be suicide unless he had irrefutable proof and support from within the system itself. So, he started laying the groundwork, reaching out to individuals who shared his disdain for corruption. Among them were journalists, activists, and former law enforcement officers, disillusioned by the very institutions they once served. Together they formed a loose coalition, united by a common goal: to expose the truth and hold the guilty accountable. As Marcus honed his skills and expanded his network, he occasionally allowed himself to think about home. He wondered how much had changed since he left, whether his grandmother was still alive and if anyone in town remembered his father's name. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit alone in his apartment staring at the photograph of James Reed. In those quiet moments, he reminded himself why he had sacrificed so much, to ensure that no one else suffered the way he had. The memory of his father's death drove him forward, fueling his determination to see justice done. By the time Marcus reached his mid-30s, he felt ready to return to his hometown. Over 2 decades had passed since he last set foot there, and he knew stepping back onto those streets would stir up painful memories. But he also knew it was time. Harris and Grayson were older now, their power seemingly untouchable, but Marcus had spent years preparing for this moment. He had gathered allies, acquired skills, and built a plan that left little room for error. Revenge was no longer just a fleeting fantasy. It was a tangible goal within reach. Before making his move, Marcus spent months gathering intelligence on Harris and Grayson. Using his investigative expertise, he tracked their movements, identified their weak points, and uncovered secrets that could bring them down. He discovered that Harris frequented a seedy bar on the outskirts of town, where he gambled away large sums of money. Grayson, meanwhile, had a penchant for expensive cars and luxury vacations funded by bribes and kickbacks. Both men lived recklessly, believing themselves untouchable. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had been watching them the entire time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. With his preparations complete, Marcus packed his bags and boarded a bus headed for his hometown. As the vehicle rolled closer to the place he once called home, a mix of emotions swirled inside him. Fear, anger, and anticipation battled for dominance, but above all there was resolve. He clenched his fists tightly, feeling the photograph of his father tucked safely in his pocket. The son of James Reed was coming back, not as a scared child, but as a man armed with knowledge, resources, and an unyielding thirst for vengeance. And when he arrived, the town would tremble under the weight of its own sins. The bus ride back to his hometown felt both familiar and surreal for Marcus. As the landscape shifted from bustling city streets to rolling hills and quiet farmland, memories flooded his mind. He remembered riding this same route as a child with his father, laughing and talking about school or sports. Those happy moments now seemed like fragments of someone else's life, distant and unreachable. The closer he got to town, the heavier the weight on his chest became. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was dread mixed with determination. He knew that stepping foot in this place again would reopen old wounds, but he also understood it was necessary. His mission wasn't about closure, it was about justice. When the bus finally pulled into the station, Marcus stepped off and took a deep breath. The air smelled different here, cleaner, tinged with the faint scent of pine trees, but it carried an underlying tension he hadn't noticed before. Everything looked smaller than he remembered, yet somehow darker too. The once bright buildings now appeared faded and worn, their bricks cracked and ivy overgrown. People walked by without paying him much attention, absorbed in their own lives. For a moment, Marcus wondered if anyone would recognize him. 20 years had changed him completely. He was taller, stronger, and harder-edged, his boyish features replaced by a stern jawline and piercing eyes. Even his posture exuded purpose, as though every step he took carried meaning. Marcus checked into a modest motel on the edge of town, choosing a room with a view of the main street. From there, he could observe comings and goings without drawing suspicion. Over the next few days, he spent hours walking around, reacquainting himself with the town while keeping a low profile. He visited places he used to frequent as a child, the park where he played catch with his father, the diner where they shared Saturday breakfasts, the library where he first discovered his love for books. Each location stirred bittersweet emotions, but Marcus forced himself to stay focused. Sentimentality wouldn't help him achieve his goal. During these walks, Marcus began noticing subtle changes in the town's atmosphere. Corruption had seeped deeper into its veins, manifesting in ways that were impossible to ignore. Police cars patrolled constantly, officers glaring at anyone who dared question their authority. Businesses displayed signs thanking local heroes in what seemed like thinly veiled attempts to curry favor with law enforcement. Conversations among residents were hushed, filled with cautious glances over shoulders. It was clear that fear ruled this town now, choking out any semblance of freedom or trust. And at the center of it all stood Detective Harris and Lieutenant Grayson, their influence stronger than ever. Marcus decided to start gathering information cautiously. Posing as a freelance journalist researching law enforcement practices in small towns, he approached local shopkeepers, bartenders, and even former classmates. At first, people were hesitant to talk, wary of being overheard or targeted, but Marcus had learned how to read between the lines, coaxing out fragments of truth through careful questioning. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Harris and Grayson weren't just corrupt cops anymore. They were untouchable kingpins, orchestrating illegal activities ranging from drug trafficking to money laundering. Their empire stretched beyond the police department, reaching politicians, judges, and business owners who owed them favors or feared retaliation. What struck Marcus most was how deeply embedded corruption had become in the community. Entire families depended on the syndicate for jobs, protection, or financial support. Some genuinely believed Harris and Grayson were doing good work, turning a blind eye to their crimes because it benefited them personally. Others remained silent out of fear, knowing that speaking up would mean risking everything. Marcus realized that dismantling this network wouldn't be as simple as exposing two men. It required unraveling decades of complicity and manipulation. The thought overwhelmed him at times, but he reminded himself why he had come back. If no one else would stand up, then he would have to do it alone. As Marcus delved deeper into his investigation, he started tailing Harris and Grayson discreetly. Using skills honed during his time as a private investigator, he followed them to late-night meetings in abandoned warehouses, clandestine rendezvous in dimly lit bars, and secret drop-offs in secluded alleys. He documented everything meticulously, snapping photos, recording conversations, and jotting down notes in a small notebook he carried everywhere. Every piece of evidence brought him closer to exposing the truth, but it also increased the danger he faced. One wrong move, one careless mistake, and he could end up dead, or worse, silenced forever. Despite the risks, Marcus found solace in the routine of his work. Each day felt like progress, no matter how small. He rented a second-hand car to blend in better and bought basic surveillance equipment online, setting up cameras in strategic locations. He hacked into public records, uncovering discrepancies in financial reports and property transactions linked to Harris and Grayson. With each discovery, his confidence grew. These men might have thought themselves invincible, but Marcus knew better. They had grown complacent, relying on fear and intimidation to maintain control. That arrogance would be their downfall. One evening, while reviewing footage from a hidden camera outside a bar frequented by Harris, Marcus caught something significant. Harris met with a nervous-looking man wearing a suit, exchanging envelopes, under the table. Though Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, the exchange spoke volumes. He recognized the man as a local politician notorious for pushing policies benefiting wealthy elites. Connecting the dots, Marcus realized this was part of a larger scheme involving bribery and political favors. Armed with this new lead, he dug deeper, uncovering ties between Harris, Grayson, and several other high-ranking officials. The web of corruption extended further than he'd imagined, implicating nearly everyone in positions of power. With mounting evidence in hand, Marcus knew he needed allies within the system. Taking down Harris and Grayson alone was risky enough, but confronting an entire network required inside help. Drawing on connections made during his years as a private investigator, he reached out to trusted individuals willing to assist him. Among them was Sarah, a tenacious reporter who specialized in investigative journalism, and Daniel, a retired detective disillusioned by the very force he once served. Both agreed to join Marcus's cause, providing valuable insights and resources. Together they formed a tight-knit team, meeting secretly in Marcus's motel room to strategize and plan their next moves. Sarah proved particularly invaluable. Her experience navigating media outlets allowed her to publish damning articles exposing minor scandals connected to Harris and Grayson's operations. While not directly implicating the duo, these stories planted seeds of doubt in the public's mind, eroding their untouchable image. Meanwhile, Daniel tapped into old contacts within the police department, gathering intel on internal dynamics and identifying potential whistleblowers. Marcus coordinated their efforts, ensuring they worked cohesively toward the ultimate goal, bringing Harris and Grayson to justice. Even as the pieces fell into place, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Harris and Grayson were growing suspicious, tightening security around themselves and cracking down on anyone behaving unusually. Rumors spread about increased patrols and random searches, creating an atmosphere of paranoia. Marcus knew he had to act quickly before they caught wind of his operation. Yet, rushing blindly into confrontation wasn't an option either. Patience and precision were key, qualities he had cultivated over 2 decades of preparation. In quieter moments, Marcus allowed himself to reflect on his journey. He thought about the sacrifices he had made, the relationships he had sacrificed, and the person he had become. There were times when he questioned whether revenge was worth it, whether pursuing justice would truly bring peace. But whenever doubt crept in, he remembered his father's words about standing up for what is right. James Reed hadn't fought for personal gain. He had fought for fairness and honesty. Carrying on that legacy gave Marcus strength, reminding him that his mission transcended personal vendettas. By the time Marcus finalized his plan, he felt ready, not just physically but emotionally. He had transformed himself into someone capable of facing the monsters who had destroyed his family. No longer the frightened boy hiding behind his father's body, he was now a man armed with knowledge, determination, and unwavering resolve. As he stared at the photograph of James Reed one last time, he whispered softly, "This is for you, Dad." Then, putting the picture back in his pocket, he stepped out into the night, ready to confront the darkness head-on. Whatever happened, next he knew he wouldn't back down. Justice was waiting, and so was vengeance. The night air was thick with tension as Marcus moved silently through the shadows of his hometown. Every step he took echoed in his mind, each movement calculated and deliberate. He had spent weeks planning this moment, piecing together every detail until it was flawless, or as close to flawless as possible. The evidence he had gathered painted a damning picture of Detective Harris and Lieutenant Grayson, exposing not only their involvement in James Reed's murder, but also the vast web of corruption they had woven over decades. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Marcus needed leverage, something powerful enough to dismantle the entire system protecting them. And tonight, he intended to find it. Harris and Grayson were creatures of habit, predictable in their routines, despite their careful attempts to appear otherwise. Marcus knew that Harris frequented a seedy bar on the outskirts of town every Thursday evening, often meeting shady characters for deals conducted under the table. Tonight was no exception. Using binoculars from a nearby rooftop, Marcus watched as Harris entered the dimly lit establishment, his silhouette framed by the flickering neon sign above the door. A few minutes later, a nervous-looking man joined him, a local politician whose name Marcus recognized from his research. This was the same man Marcus had caught on camera exchanging envelopes with Harris weeks earlier. Whatever they were discussing inside that bar, it was bound to be incriminating. Marcus didn't waste any time. Slipping down from the rooftop, he made his way to the back of the building, where he had planted a small listening device earlier in the week. Pressing his earpiece into place, he tuned into the conversation unfolding inside. At first, the voices were muffled, drowned out by the low hum of music and chatter. But as he adjusted the frequency, the words became clearer. Harris was speaking in hushed tones, laying out plans for a new construction project that would displace dozens of families in exchange for kickbacks funneled through shell companies. The politician nodded eagerly, promising to push the necessary legislation through without scrutiny. It was yet another example of how deeply entrenched corruption had become in this town. But then something unexpected happened. The politician leaned closer to Harris, lowering his voice even further. "We need to deal with the loose ends," he said, his tone sharp and urgent. "Word is, someone's been poking around, asking questions about old cases. If they dig too deep, everything could unravel." Harris stiffened visibly, his eyes narrowing. "I'll handle it," he replied coldly. "No one gets close to us without consequences." Marcus's heart raced as he processed what he had just heard. They weren't just talking about silencing whistleblowers. They were actively hunting for whoever was gathering information against them. That meant they suspected someone was onto them, and if they figured out it was Marcus, he would become their next target. Time was running out faster than he had anticipated. He needed to act quickly before they tightened their grip even more. Returning to his motel room, Marcus spread out all the evidence he had collected so far across the bed. Photographs, documents, audio recordings, and handwritten notes formed a chaotic mosaic of betrayal and greed. Each piece told part of the story, but Marcus realized he needed something bigger, something explosive, to break the syndicate wide open. His gaze landed on a folder containing details about Grayson's lavish lifestyle, expensive cars, luxury vacations, and properties purchased with unexplained wealth. There had to be a paper trail linking these assets to illegal activities. If he could trace the money back to its source, he might uncover a scandal big enough to force those in power to turn on Harris and Grayson. With renewed determination, Marcus reached out to Sarah, the investigative journalist who had become an integral part of his team. Together, they combed through financial records, cross-referencing transactions, and identifying suspicious patterns. What they found was staggering. Grayson had been funneling bribes and kickbacks through offshore accounts, using intermediaries to mask the origins of the funds. One account in particular stood out. It belonged to a shell company registered under the name of a prominent judge known for ruling in favor of law enforcement. The connection was undeniable. With this information, Marcus could threaten to expose not only Grayson but also the judge, creating cracks in the protective shield surrounding the syndicate. Over the next few days, Marcus orchestrated a series of carefully timed leaks. Working with Sarah, he fed select pieces of evidence to trusted contacts within the media, ensuring that the stories gained traction without revealing his identity. Headlines began appearing in local newspapers, accusing high-ranking officials of financial misconduct and unethical behavior. Public outrage grew, fueled by years of suppressed anger and mistrust. People started questioning the integrity of their leaders, demanding answers and accountability. Meanwhile, Daniel, the retired detective, worked behind the scenes to rally support from within the police department. He identified officers disillusioned by Harris and Grayson's reign of terror, convincing them to come forward with testimonies about systemic abuses of power. As pressure mounted, Harris and Grayson grew increasingly paranoid. Their once confident demeanor gave way to agitation, evident in their erratic behavior and frequent arguments. Marcus observed them closely, noting how their paranoia isolated them from allies who might have otherwise defended them. Slowly but surely, the foundation of their empire began to crumble. Yet Marcus knew the final blow had to come from within, their own actions sealing their fate. One fateful afternoon, Marcus received a call from one of his informants within the police department. Apparently, Harris and Grayson had scheduled an emergency meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Rumors circulated that they planned to destroy key evidence tying them to various crimes. Realizing this was his chance to catch them red-handed, Marcus sprang into action. He coordinated with Sarah and Daniel, setting up surveillance equipment around the warehouse while alerting a network of journalists and activists to stand by for live coverage. That evening, as rain poured down in sheets, Marcus positioned himself near the entrance of the warehouse, hidden beneath a tarp. Through his earpiece, he listened as Harris and Grayson arrived, their voices tense and hurried. Inside, they argued about who was responsible for the recent leaks, blaming each other for the growing chaos. Then Harris pulled out a stack of documents and began feeding them into a shredder. Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the urge to storm in and stop them. But patience was crucial. He needed to let events unfold naturally, ensuring there was no room for doubt when the truth came to light. Just as Harris finished disposing of the papers, Grayson's phone rang. From the snippets Marcus overheard, it became clear that someone had tipped off authorities about their location. Panicked, the two men scrambled to gather their belongings and flee. But before they could make it out, headlights illuminated the scene as patrol cars surrounded the warehouse. Officers stormed inside, arresting Harris and Grayson on charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Marcus watched from the shadows, a grim smile spreading across his face. After 20 years of waiting, the men who had killed his father were finally behind bars. However, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. While Harris and Grayson's arrest marked a significant victory, the larger network of corruption still loomed large. Many accomplices remained free, protected by layers of bureaucracy and fear. Marcus understood that dismantling the entire system would require sustained effort, not just from him, but from everyone willing to fight for justice. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the rain-soaked streets, Marcus felt a mix of relief and resolve. He had fulfilled his promise to his father, but the battle wasn't over yet. Justice demanded vigilance, and Marcus was prepared to keep fighting until the town was free from the shadows of its past. The arrest of Detective Harris and Lieutenant Grayson sent shockwaves through the town, shaking its very foundations. For decades, these men had operated with impunity, their names synonymous with power and fear. Now, they sat in handcuffs, their faces plastered across newspapers and television screens as symbols of corruption brought to justice. The public reaction was a mix of disbelief, anger, and cautious hope. Some residents cheered openly, celebrating what felt like the dawn of a new era. Others remained silent, unsure whether this was truly the end or just another chapter in a never-ending cycle of deceit. Marcus watched it all from the sidelines, his expression unreadable but his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Though Harris and Grayson were behind bars, Marcus knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Their arrest had exposed cracks in the syndicate's armor, but the battle was far from over. Behind closed doors, politicians, judges, and business owners scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, destroying evidence and cutting ties with anyone linked to the pair. Meanwhile, those lower down the chain of command, officers, enforcers, and informants, were left scrambling for cover, desperate to avoid becoming collateral damage. It was chaos, but chaos also created opportunities. Marcus understood that now was the time to strike, to push harder and dig deeper before the remaining players could regroup and fortify their defenses. With Sarah and Daniel by his side, Marcus intensified his efforts, working tirelessly to unravel the tangled web of corruption. They pored over files seized during Harris and Grayson's arrest, piecing together connections between seemingly unrelated individuals and organizations. Every document, every email, and every financial transaction told part of the story, revealing how deeply rooted the rot had become. What started as a localized investigation into two corrupt cops had evolved into something much larger, a full-scale exposé of systemic abuse spanning multiple industries and institutions. The scale of it all was staggering, even to someone as determined as Marcus. One of the most shocking discoveries came when Sarah uncovered a series of encrypted emails between Grayson and a high-ranking official at City Hall. The correspondence detailed plans for a massive land development project that would have displaced hundreds of families, many of whom lived below the poverty line. In exchange for approving the project, Grayson and his accomplices stood to receive millions in kickbacks, funneled through offshore accounts. When Sarah published her findings, outrage erupted across the town. Protesters took to the streets, demanding accountability not only for Harris and Grayson, but for everyone involved in perpetuating such injustice. The pressure mounted, forcing authorities to launch additional investigations. Despite the mounting evidence, some within the system fought back fiercely. Lawyers representing Harris and Grayson argued that the arrests were based on insufficient proof, attempting to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the charges. Others used their influence to delay proceedings, dragging out court dates and filing endless appeals. But Marcus anticipated this resistance and prepared accordingly. He worked closely with Daniel to identify former officers willing to testify against their ex-colleagues, offering them immunity in exchange for cooperation. These testimonies proved invaluable, providing first-hand accounts of illegal activities and cementing the case against Harris and Grayson. As the legal proceedings dragged on, Marcus turned his attention to dismantling the broader network. Using the information gathered from Grayson's emails and other sources, he targeted key figures still clinging to power. Judges accused of taking bribes found themselves facing ethics committees. Politicians implicated in shady deals suddenly resigned amid public outcry. Business owners who had profited from corrupt practices saw their reputations tarnished overnight. Each victory was small, but together they added up, weakening the foundation upon which the syndicate had thrived for so long. Yet, amidst the triumphs, there were setbacks too. Anonymous threats began arriving at Marcus's motel room. Notes slipped under the door warning him to back off or face consequences. His car tires were slashed one night, and graffiti appeared on the walls near his hiding spots, taunting him with messages like, "You can't win," and "We're watching." At first, Marcus dismissed these incidents as attempts to intimidate him, refusing to let fear dictate his actions. But when Sarah received a threatening phone call late one evening, her voice trembling as she recounted the chilling words spoken by an unknown caller, Marcus realized the danger extended beyond himself. He couldn't risk putting his allies in harm's way. Determined to protect those helping him, Marcus devised a plan to expose the entire operation publicly, ensuring transparency and accountability. With Sarah's expertise in journalism and Daniel's insider knowledge of law enforcement protocols, they created a secure online platform where whistleblowers could anonymously share information without fear of retaliation. Within days, tips poured in from all corners of the town, details about bribes, cover-ups, and abuses of power that had long been buried. The platform became a beacon of hope for ordinary citizens tired of living under the shadow of corruption, empowering them to speak out without fear. While managing the influx of information, Marcus continued to monitor Harris and Grayson's trial closely. Despite their lawyers' best efforts, the mountain of evidence against them grew insurmountable. Testimonies from former colleagues painted a damning picture of their involvement in countless crimes, while financial records exposed the extent of their greed. As the verdict drew near, anticipation gripped the town. Would justice finally prevail? Or would Harris and Grayson walk free once again? On the day of the verdict, crowds gathered outside the courthouse, holding banners and chanting slogans calling for accountability. Inside, Marcus sat quietly in the back row, his eyes fixed on Harris and Grayson as they listened intently to the judge's ruling. When the guilty verdict was announced, cheers erupted both inside and outside the courtroom. Tears streamed down Marcus's face as relief washed over him. After 20 years of waiting, dreaming, and fighting, he had finally achieved what seemed impossible. The men who had murdered his father were convicted criminals, sentenced to life in prison without parole. But even as celebrations unfolded, Marcus couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. Harrison Grayson's conviction marked a significant milestone, but it wasn't enough to cleanse the town entirely. Corruption ran deep, its roots intertwined with nearly every aspect of life here. Breaking free from its grip required more than arrests and convictions. It demanded a cultural shift, a collective commitment to transparency and integrity. Marcus knew his work wasn't done yet. If anything, it was just beginning. In the weeks following the trial, Marcus dedicated himself to rebuilding trust within the community. He partnered with local organizations to host workshops and seminars aimed at educating residents about civic engagement and ethical leadership. Together with Sarah and Daniel, he advocated for reforms within the police department, pushing for stricter oversight and accountability measures. Slowly, but surely, change began to take root. Officers who had once feared speaking out now voiced concerns openly, knowing they had support. Citizens grew bolder, demanding answers and holding leaders accountable for their actions. Through it all, Marcus carried the memory of his father close to his heart. James Reed's sacrifice had ignited a flame within him, a relentless pursuit of justice that refused to be extinguished. Though nothing could bring James back, Marcus found solace in knowing that his father's legacy lived on through the changes he had helped bring about. The town might never fully heal from the scars of its past, but it was moving forward step by painful step. Late one evening, as Marcus stood atop the same rooftop where he had first spied on Harrison Grayson months earlier, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Below him, the streets buzzed with activity. Children playing, couples strolling hand in hand, shopkeepers closing up for the night. Life went on, resilient and enduring, despite everything it had endured. Marcus felt a sense of peace wash over him, tempered by the knowledge that vigilance would always be necessary. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required constant effort and unwavering courage. Turning away from the view, Marcus descended the stairs and stepped back onto the street. The photograph of his father rested safely in his pocket, a reminder of why he had fought so hard and sacrificed so much. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it head-on. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them with the same determination that had carried him this far. For Marcus Reed, the son of James Reed, justice wasn't just a goal. It was a promise kept. And though the road ahead might be uncertain, one thing was clear. He would never stop fighting for what was right. The arrest of Detective Harris and Lieutenant Grayson sent shockwaves through the town, shaking its very foundation. For years, these men had operated with impunity, their crimes hidden behind badges and lies. Now, as they sat in handcuffs, flanked by officers who once feared them, the illusion of invincibility crumbled. News of their capture spread like wildfire, igniting a mix of emotions among residents: relief, disbelief, anger, and even fear. Some cheered openly, celebrating what felt like the first step toward freedom from oppression. Others stayed silent, unsure whether this marked the end of tyranny or merely a temporary disruption. Marcus watched it all unfold from a distance, his face unreadable but his heart heavy with conflicting feelings. He had achieved what he set out to do, yet the victory felt hollow without his father by his side. In the days following the arrests, investigators combed through decades of evidence linked to Harris and Grayson's activities. What they uncovered was staggering, a labyrinth of corruption that reached far beyond the police department. Politicians, judges, business owners, and even clergy members were implicated in schemes involving bribery, extortion, and cover-ups. Files revealed how the syndicate manipulated elections, silenced dissenters, and exploited vulnerable communities for profit. Each revelation peeled back another layer of rot, exposing the depth of betrayal that had poisoned the town for generations. Marcus played a crucial role in guiding authorities, providing them with leads and connecting dots that others might have missed. His meticulous documentation proved invaluable, ensuring no stone was left unturned. As the investigation expanded, public outrage grew louder. Protests erupted outside City Hall, demanding accountability not only for Harris and Grayson, but also for everyone complicit in their crimes. Local journalists, emboldened by Sarah's relentless reporting, dug deeper into the scandal, uncovering new details daily. The media frenzy put immense pressure on officials to act swiftly and transparently. Fearing backlash, some individuals within the syndicate began turning on each other, offering testimonies in exchange for leniency. It was a domino effect, one betrayal leading to another until the entire structure teetered on the brink of collapse. Marcus observed this unraveling, with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Justice was being served, but at what cost? Lives had been ruined, trust shattered, and scars etched too deeply to heal anytime soon. Despite the progress, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. While Harris and Grayson faced charges for their roles in countless atrocities, including James Reed's murder, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption didn't die easily. It adapted, mutated, and found new ways to survive. Even if the current network fell apart, there would always be those willing to exploit power for personal gain. To truly protect the town, systemic change was needed, reforms that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. With this realization, Marcus shifted his focus from revenge to rebuilding. He began working closely with community leaders, activists, and legal experts to draft proposals aimed at increasing transparency, strengthening oversight, and empowering citizens. These efforts weren't glamorous or immediately gratifying, but they mattered more in the long run. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his motel room reviewing drafts of reform policies, there was a knock at the door. Opening it cautiously, he found Daniel standing there holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use a break," the retired detective said with a weary smile. Marcus invited him in, grateful for the company. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their experiences fighting corruption. Daniel admitted he had doubted Marcus's chances of success when they first met, but seeing how much he had accomplished changed his perspective. "You're proof that one person can make a difference," Daniel said earnestly. "But don't forget, you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, absorbing Daniel's words. He realized that while his journey had started as a solitary quest for vengeance, it had evolved into something greater. Along the way, he had built alliances, inspired others to join the cause, and created a movement bigger than himself. This realization brought both comfort and clarity. He didn't need to fix everything overnight or ever completely. What mattered was planting seeds of hope and resilience that future generations could nurture. A few weeks later, Marcus decided to visit his grandmother. She still lived in the same house where she had raised him after his father's death, though age had slowed her movements considerably. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, tears filled her eyes. They embraced tightly, neither speaking for several minutes. Finally, she pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "You look so much like your father," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus smiled softly, feeling a pang of bittersweet nostalgia. Inside, he showed her newspaper clippings detailing Harris and Grayson's downfall, explaining everything he had done to bring justice to their family. She listened quietly, nodding occasionally, her pride evident in every glance she gave him. That night, Marcus walked to the spot where his father had been killed. The street corner looked different now, brighter, cleaner, but the memory lingered, heavily in the air. Standing there, he closed his eyes and let himself remember. Not just the pain of that night, but the joy too, the laughter, the lessons, the love. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him why he had fought so hard. The world needs people willing to stand up for truth. Marcus took a deep breath, releasing years of pent-up grief and anger. He knelt down, placing the photograph of James Reed gently on the ground before walking away. It was time to let go, not of the memories, but of the weight they carried. Over the next few months, Marcus continued working tirelessly to rebuild the town. He collaborated with educators to develop programs teaching students about civic responsibility and ethical leadership. He partnered with nonprofits to provide resources for families affected by corruption. And he advocated for policy changes, designed to prevent similar abuses of power in the future. Though challenges remained, progress was undeniable. Slowly but surely, the town began transforming, not into something perfect, but into something better. Trust, though fragile, started to take root again. Eventually, Marcus decided it was time to leave. He had fulfilled his promise to his father and laid the groundwork for lasting change. Staying any longer risked burning him out or turning his mission into an obsession. Packing his belongings, he said goodbye to Sarah, Daniel, and others who had become like family to him. As he boarded a bus heading out of town, he glanced back one last time. The place that had once defined his pain now represented resilience and renewal. He didn't know where life would take him next, but he felt ready for whatever came. His father's legacy lived on, not just in the justice served, but in the courage he had inspired in others. Years later, Marcus returned briefly for the unveiling of a memorial dedicated to James Reed and other victims of corruption. Standing amidst friends, allies, and strangers united by shared purpose, he felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, they never would, but they no longer controlled him. Instead, they reminded him of how far he and the town had come. As he placed a single flower at the base of the monument, Marcus whispered softly, "Thank you, Dad." Then, turning away, he stepped into the sunlight, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.